3 minutes to 2 in the afternoon. A man in a wicker basket is having trouble with a pencil. He writes down the reading anyway, because that is his job. 10 inches of mercury. On the table in front of him there is a conversion for that. 29,000 feet, which is the summit of Everest. He is not on Everest. He is over Shropshire, in an open basket, in an overcoat and a top hat, in the year 1862. And the balloon is still going up. Then his arm stops working. You're listening to Static Reports. Tonight's file is the 5th of September, 1862. 2 men, no oxygen, no pressure suit, no cabin, a basket made of willow and a rope. They reach the height of a mountain that no human being has ever stood on and will not stand on for another 91 years. And here is the part that never fits the story people expect. They were not doing it for a record. They were not doing it for a crowd. There was a committee. There was a budget. There were receipts. To see why anyone would do this, you have to see what the Victorians did not have. By the 1860s, Britain measured the weather obsessively. Thermometers in gardens, rain gauges on parish walls, barometers in every harbor office, all of it at ground level. They could tell you the temperature of the air 4 feet above a lawn in Kent, every day for 30 years. They could not tell you what it was doing at 14,000. Nobody had been up there with an instrument. The last unmapped place on Earth was directly overhead, and it was the one that decided whether your harvest lived. So the British Association for the Advancement of Science did what learned societies do. It appointed a committee. The membership reads like a roll call of Victorian science. Airy, Herschel, Tyndall, Admiral Fitzroy, who had captained the Beagle. Their instruction was 1 sentence long. Make observations in the higher strata of the atmosphere by means of the balloon. The rate they settled on was about 50 pounds an ascent. Gas and wear. They needed an observer, and they chose a meteorologist from the Royal Observatory named James Glaisher. And they needed somebody who could actually fly the thing. That was Henry Coxwell. Coxwell had trained as a dentist, and then given it up for balloons. Hundreds of ascents, paid, at the pleasure gardens of London. Remember the teeth. We'll come back to them. For the association, he built the largest balloon in Britain, 90,000 cubic feet. They called it the Mammoth. And it is not a hot air balloon. There is no burner. Nothing on board makes heat. It is filled with coal gas, straight off the mains at the Stafford Road Gasworks in Wolverhampton. The same gas that lit the street lamps. Once it is up, the only control you have is letting some of it out. Now, the work itself. Lashed across that basket is a table, dry and wet bulb thermometers, a mercury barometer, and an aneroid, a hygrometer, a compass, a chronometer. None of it records anything by itself. Every reading is a man leaning over glass, finding a line, and writing it in pencil. Every few minutes, all the way up. And here's the thing to hold on to for the rest of this. Nobody up there is measuring height. You can't measure height in a balloon. You measure pressure, and you convert. And the conversion assumes a temperature for all the air underneath you. In very cold air, the number it hands back drifts. One more item goes into the basket. A cage. 6 pigeons. Partly they are a postal system. A bird released from a balloon gets a note down faster than the balloon can land. And partly they are the experiment. Nobody knows what thin air does to a living body, because nobody has taken one that high and come back to describe it. So you take something small that knows how to fly, and you let it go, and you watch. The pigeons are the control. The men are the experiment. They just don't put it that way in the report. 3 minutes past 1 in the afternoon. Wolverhampton. The Mammoth lifts. Ground temperature, 59 degrees. A mile up, 41. Cloud closes over the town, and then they come out on top of it, into flat sunlight, on a floor of white going to every horizon. 2 miles. Freezing point. 3 miles. 18 degrees. 4 miles. 8 degrees. 5 miles up, the thermometer passes 0 and keeps going. And Glaisher writes it down, and writes down the dew point beside it, and notes the time. Nobody has ever taken these readings. That is the entire point of being here. The pigeons go out on the way. At 3 miles, one is dropped over the side. It does not fly. Glaisher writes that it fell like a sheet of paper. At 4 miles, the next one flies, but heavily, in a circle, as though the air will not hold it. Somewhere between 4 and 5 miles, the third goes over. It drops, like a stone. A fourth gets out and will not leave the balloon at all. It rides on top of the canvas, up and back down. 2 are still in the basket at the end. One of them is dead. 9 minutes to 2. Barometer, 11.05. Glaisher looks at the fine divisions on the scale and finds he cannot separate them. He wants to look at the clock. He is a man who has looked at that clock 400 times today. He lays his arm on the table. It works. Then he wants to use it, and it is powerless. He tries the other arm. The same. He shakes his body and finds he still has his back, still has his neck, nothing below the shoulders. 3 minutes to 2. 10 inches. 29,000 feet. He writes it. It is the last thing he writes. The sight goes next. Not all at once, closing in from the edges. He can still see Coxwell, dimly. Not in the basket. The balloon has been turning as it climbs, and the turning has wound the valve line up into the ring, the hoop above their heads where the whole thing hangs together. Coxwell has climbed out to get it. He describes it afterwards plainly, the way that generation described things. Piercingly cold, hoarfrost round the neck of the balloon. Glaisher tries to speak to him and finds that he can't. And then the light goes out. Coxwell gets the line free and discovers that his hands have stopped. Not numb, stopped. Frozen through and going black. He gets himself back down into the basket. He never fully explains how, and he cannot close his fingers on the cord. So he puts it in his teeth and pulls with his head. Twice, maybe 3 times. Somewhere above them, the valve opens, and gas begins to go out of the top of the Mammoth, and the balloon takes a decided turn downward. A dentist saved both their lives with his teeth. I did tell you we'd come back to that. Four minutes past 2. Glaisher comes round. 7 minutes gone. There is a hole in his record where the handwriting stops, and then it starts again. He says to Coxwell, "I have been insensible." And Coxwell says, "You have, and I too, very nearly." And then Glaisher picks up the pencil and goes back to work. Temperature, dew point, time, all the way down. They land at 20 past 3 in a grass field at Cold Weston, 7 miles from Ludlow. There is nobody there. No crowd, no carriage. 2 men, a collapsed balloon, and 1 black pair of hands. So they walked. Now, how high did they actually get? Honestly, we don't know, and anybody who gives you one number is selling you something. Glaisher put it at 37,000 feet, on Coxwell's memory of a glance at the barometer, with his hands turning black. Most of his contemporaries thought that was too generous. The aeronautical historian Gibbs Smith went the other way entirely. 19,000, and the claim is nonsense. Cold air bends the conversion, and both men were unconscious at the top. So take the floor instead. The floor is the number a conscious man wrote in pencil, off a working instrument, before his hands failed. 10 inches, 29,000 feet, still climbing. And in 1862, that mountain did not have a name. The Survey of India had measured it 6 years earlier and filed it as Peak 15, 29,002 feet. It would not be called Everest until 1865. Nobody stood on the summit until 1953, breathing bottled oxygen. Nobody managed it without the bottles until 1978, and afterwards one of the 2 described gaps in his memory that never filled back in. Glaisher went through that altitude sitting down, in tweed, taking notes. It took 13 years for anyone to prove what it should have cost him. 15th of April, 1875. A French balloon, the Zénith. 3 men. This time there is oxygen on board, bags of it, on the advice of a physiologist named Paul Burt, who had worked out what thin air actually does. They reached for it too late. The Zénith came down with 3 men in the basket. 2 of them were dead. The third was deaf for the rest of his life. Burt published his book 3 years later, and aviation medicine starts there. It isn't the pressure that kills you, it's how little oxygen is left inside it. And everything we built afterwards is the same answer. A sealed room, the flight suit, the mask in the ceiling, which is where you have almost certainly been without thinking about it once. 35,000 feet, a tray table, a film you're not really watching. The cabin around you is held at about 6,000, a pleasant afternoon in the mountains, and that is the only reason you are awake, to be bored. If it stops holding, you have somewhere between 30 seconds and a minute to do anything useful about it. That's the whole margin. That is the entire difference between your seat and a wicker basket over Shropshire. Glaisher lived to 93. He went up again and again. 28 ascents. And the last thing he did before the dark came down, arms already gone, balloon still rising, was write the number down. This has been Static Reports. Mind the gap in the record. The transmission ends.